Hey everyone, welcome back to another Tic Tac Taiko. I got a very unusual request from one of my viewers the other day. They wanted me to talk about rolls, and I thought, that's not something I normally would do on this channel, but sure, why not? So, I tend towards a nice sourdough roll, but I could also do something that's whole grain. I mean, pretty much anything fresh out of the oven.
Drum rolls.
Sorry?
Not bread rolls, drum rolls.
Wait, what?
Drum rolls.
Oh. Haha. Hey everyone, welcome back to another Tic Tac Taiko. I got a very wonderful request from one of my viewers the other day. They wanted me to talk about drum rolls. So that's what we're going to talk about this week. Before I get into things, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. Let YouTube know you like the content. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done that yet. It helps engagement, helps more people see it, helps the Taiko community, makes my day, makes your day. You know how this goes. Almost every Taiko player knows how to do a roll. Little kids, people who have never touched a drum before, it doesn't matter. You get two sticks, you raise them in the air and you go brrrr, you just play loud and fast, and sometimes it sounds like you want it to sound and sometimes it doesn't, but you have the idea of what a roll is. So what I want to do is talk about what a drum roll really is from, say, a Western percussion perspective. Then we're going to talk about how to do it for Taiko, and then a little bit of how to practice it at the end. So let's get to it. Now I want to mention that I am using a drum pad and Western sticks. They're light, they're thin, and they have a taper at the end. Similar to Shimadeiko bachi. However, with a Shimadeiko bachi, you would have this type of end versus this type of end. And this makes a huge difference in the weight and the amount of recoil and rebound you might get from hitting a surface. This doesn't mean you can't do these techniques on a Shimadeiko, an Okedo, or even a Chudaiko, but the bigger the drum, the looser the head, the heavier the bachi, and the wider the bachi tip at the end, the less rebound you're going to get. So in other words, your results may vary. So let's talk about the different types of rolls you might encounter in Western percussion and how they may or may not apply to Taiko. We'll start with the single stroke roll. This is the Taiko roll, you could say. You start by playing right, left, and you alternate back and forth at a high speed. Next, you have the double stroke roll. The difference here is that you're playing twice with each hand, not once with each hand. This is much easier to do in Western percussion when you have something like a snare drum, because the head is so tight, the bachi or the drumsticks will just bounce much easier than a drum pad or any type of Taiko. Which is probably why you don't see it very often in Taiko, because double stroke rolls are much harder to do at any sort of speed. And then you can go on, you have your triple stroke rolls, which you guessed it, 3 notes with either hand. While this isn't very practical for Taiko, it's a really good exercise to increase your chops, hand strength, finger dexterity, everything you're going to want to use in Taiko. And then there are things like the 5-stroke roll, which in this case would be right, left, right. Sometimes, not often, accent at the end. Again, maybe not practical for Taiko, but a really good exercise to do. And you can see this increasing to a 7 or 9-stroke roll. You just increase the number of double strokes you're going to do to get to the number you want. And there are others like the 6-stroke roll, paradiddle rolls, there's all kinds of other rolls you can do, but essentially for Taiko, we stick with single stroke rolls. Now let's talk technique. There's 2 things you're going to focus on in the hand when it comes to a roll. The first is the muscle right here between the finger and the hand. You're going to be bending here. You might bend here in the hand or the palm itself, but notice that the fingers are relatively straight when I'm bending. It might curl a little bit, and if you want to curl and bend, that's fine, but I'm not focusing on curling the fingers. These muscles here in the fingers are not what I'm using for a roll. I'm using these muscles here, almost like a wave. And the second part of the hand I'm using is going to be right here where the wrist and the hand meet. But I'm not so much bending it this way up and down as I am this way up and down. It's almost like I'm patting something. However, it's not totally flat. And here's the reason for that. Normally when I play Taiko, and other people as well, not necessarily everyone, my palms are facing each other so that I have an up strike. The V of my hand allows the bachi to move up and down. And that's where my wrist is coming up and down. But to play very, very fast, this is a really hard position. I will turn my hands over. But, and I see this a lot, especially with Western percussionists coming into Taiko, or some people who just don't really think about what's going to happen, is the palms go flat because this is easier to do when the palms are flat. Yes, it is. However, there's two issues. Number one, this visual, in my opinion, doesn't look very good at all. And you can kind of see the difference between something like this as a picture versus something like this. Second, if I want to play nothing but rapid, quiet notes, or even moderate volume, this is okay. But as soon as I want to hit a loud note or a don, this is as high as I can raise my bachi. And I don't have a lot of power generation in my hand in this position. And you can practice this. In fact, I recommend trying it out to see how it feels. I feel a lot of tension here that I don't like. So, compromise, a little bit of both. Not quite flat, not quite flat, a little bit of both. So in this case, my palm is about 45 degrees more or less to facilitate just enough wrist and just enough hand. So how do we learn to use this muscle in conjunction with this motion? Well, hate to tell you, because the answer is both easy and probably what you don't want to hear. Practice. Start slow. You're not going for volume and you're not going for speed. But evenness is a really good thing to aim for, because you don't want to roll that goes all over the place in terms of tempo, spacing between the notes, and volume between the notes. Slow and quiet is a really good place to start. And then you can increase the speed. But now start focusing on what the hands are doing, where the fingertips are, how the wrists are moving, how much the arms are involved. Let me turn to the side, you can see a little different angle. My arms are involved because I can't hold them completely still, and I don't want to. But if I take away one hand, and you can just look at the other wrist, I'm going to slow it down and exaggerate. Now I'm going to take the bachi away, if I can. I'm getting this motion. It's almost like I'm trying to cradle. And that's this position. Now, my fingers are curled slightly, and they curl as I bend them, but I'm not focusing on these muscles. It's all about getting this here. In fact, watch what happens with my fingers as I wiggle them around while still rolling. Let's see if I can angle this way to get a better visual. So you can see that the fingers can go all over the place because the tips of the fingers don't really have anything to do here. Again, I'm working on these muscles and this squeeze with the twitch and the pat of the wrist coming down. Again, practice this slow, not just to see how fast you can get, but to practice where the squeeze is happening, where the push, the whip, the pulse is happening. And if you want, you can even isolate. Try one and then the other. So let's do just the finger squeeze and leave the wrist pretty still. I'm not even worried about technique, speed, tempo. All I'm trying to do is generate an awareness of this part of the hand. Getting this comfortable. And I'm exaggerating, which is causing more stress here than I'd like, but I'm trying to teach myself, this is what I want to focus on. This is where I want my focus to be. And then we'll do the other, which is the wrist, getting the pat feeling down, again at a slight angle. I find this is harder to isolate because my fingers often really want to get involved. So I have to maybe even point them down, just curling the index finger, or sometimes lock them in place, just really focusing on not using them, so I have to use the wrist. And then maybe I can increase the tempo, but only once I've isolated the wrists from the fingers. And then eventually you incorporate both of them together. And relax. Speaking of relaxing, that's the second part of doing a good roll. I think the hardest thing for a taiko player to do is relax, but it's also the single most valuable thing. The best taiko players I have ever seen are the ones who know not just how to relax, but where not to. It's a skill and it takes a lot of practice. That's a whole video that I haven't even done yet. But for rolls, overall, relax. The best way to practice how to be relaxed during rolls is to relax, but you have to exaggerate the relaxation because your body's not going to be used to it. It's going to want to tighten up. Let me use dorotsuku as an example. Loud, loud, soft, soft. You can see how I'm pulsing. My whole body is kind of being a human metronome, but not just to keep tempo. It also helps me relax. I can throw into the doro and kind of relax and come up on the tsuku. It helps my body relax. It feels more organic. With rolls, or even just a simple straight beat, which really is what a roll is, I don't have that pulse. Everything is really easy to keep still. And I find myself and most people start to get tight and tense. Everything gets kind of caught up in control when the opposite is what you want. This is hard to do. It's especially hard to do once it starts to get tight. So I recommend when you are practicing rolls to take a good chunk of that time and practice rolls specifically while being relaxed. I recommend taking a Post-it note or a piece of paper and putting it somewhere in your visual field so you're constantly reminding yourself, relax, relax, relax. Because if you're not used to it, it's really easy to go, okay, I'm gonna relax. I'm relaxed. 30 seconds later. Having something to remind you will help you remember, obviously, to relax during that session. And you may very well have to exaggerate, and it may very well affect the quality of your rolls. That's okay, because you're focusing on relaxation in that session. So, for example, Eventually, you put both the technique and the relaxation together, and you start working on rolls as a whole. Okay, I've talked about different types of rolls, the technique of rolls, almost the mindset to take while doing rolls. Let me talk about different ways to actually practice the roll. There's about 3 different ways that I go through. There's probably a lot more, but I'll talk about the 3 that I do. The first way is to gradually get up to speed, and then once I find my threshold, going a little bit above and then coming back, and then a little bit above and coming back. This is the most common, the easiest one to do, and I think from what I've experienced, most taiko players practice rolls this way. The second way I like to practice, instead of coming from underneath, is to come over on top. So I need to know where my threshold is, because otherwise I don't know where I'm actually landing. But once I know my threshold, I try to come in at a bit above or a lot above, and I hold it, and I hold it, and then I hold it, and I hold it, and it might not always be in the same spot, but I'm trying to aim above the threshold for a short period of time. Bursts, if you will. And the third way I like to do it is some sort of meter. Not necessarily an actual, like I'm going for 120, but I'll usually just pulse my body and I'll have a count in my head. Ich, ni, so, re. 2, 3, 4. Repeat, something like that. It could be in 3, it could be in 7, it could be in 16. But it's just having a start and a stop with relaxing in the middle, sometimes literally shaking my arms out. It's a nice way to be a little more exact, having a start and stop point, rather than just going on until you feel tired or you get bored. So if you're not sure how to practice rolls, now you've got 3 really good ones to start from. And like I said, there are other ways to do rolls, but you gotta start somewhere. If you are at all interested in what people are doing with rolls that we're not seeing in taiko, you can look up any marching band, any sort of percussion ensemble, and look at what people are doing. But I specifically recommend looking up Gene Krupa, who does some amazing single stroke rolls, and Buddy Rich, who is known for his double stroke rolls. These are 2 drum legends that you can learn a lot from, even if we as taiko players can't replicate the techniques, because the drums and the equipment we have is vastly different. And finally, this week's video is a perfect example of the thing I keep bringing up. If you have something you want me to touch on, comment on, demonstrate, whatever, let me know. In this case, someone asked about rolls. I did a video on rolls. Happy to do it. I like putting this stuff out there. I like engaging the community and letting people know that, yeah, I'm here to help you. So, until next time, keep on practicing and be well.